Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. Glad you're tuning in. This is an interview I'm doing with Dan Deitrich, and thanks, Dan, for joining us on Spirituality Adventures.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dan and I met through the work that he does with Vote Common Good. And so I got connected to Doug Paget only a couple of years ago through Brian McLaren. And Brian connected me to Doug, and then Doug connected me to Rod Colburn. And so then I eventually met Dan on the Vote Common Good RV. He actually pulled the RV up in front of my house, and then I jumped on board just to hang out with him and Doug. Drove to Wichita, drove down to Texas. They went on down to the border, and I hopped on a plane and flew back because I couldn't do the whole trip with them. But Dan and I got to meet then, and it was great to talk. And then we also ended up getting to hang out just this past Memorial weekend at Mountain Film Festival in Telluride, Colorado. And that was fun. Got to meet your wife and a couple of the other folks that work with Vote Common Good. So that was great. Thanks for jumping on Spirituality Adventures. And he also co-hosts the podcast that Vote Common Good does with Doug Paget. So thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Good stuff. So let's start first by just getting a little bit of your background, your origin story, where you grew up, your family, maybe your faith orientation as you were growing up in your family, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Southwest Michigan and live here now as well, moved away and came back. But so grew up in a small town, always going to church, and very, very active, in the youth group. Got started playing music because of my youth pastor. He showed me 3 chords, and next thing I knew, I was, on stage playing with the youth group band. And
let me guess, C, G, and D.
No, this was A, D, and E. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't even play, but I just, I thought C and D was
G, C, and D came next. Yeah. I think the first song I learned was that old, I forget who does it now, but that's what I like about you. It's just 3 chords, the whole thing. And that was a fun youth group song at the time. But yeah, grew up in the church, Church of God movement out of Anderson, Indiana.
That's the non-Pentecostal.
That's right. We do not handle snakes. It's Wesleyan Arminian in theology, if you get into that. And it was a great church. It's over 100 years old, started by German immigrants, my particular congregation. And great place to grow up. And the youth group was really big for me. I was a pretty shy kid, and my parents really wanted me to get out of the house. And that's when their friend, the youth pastor, showed me some guitar chords and got me going to youth group. And even at a pretty early age, like in high school, I was just always asking questions about faith, and things that didn't quite make sense to me, I would have questions about. And I remember the senior pastor of the church actually took a meeting with me because I had some questions for him, and very kind of him to do that. But I remember asking him, what about, kids in different countries that have never heard the name Jesus? Are they going to hell? Or, what about people of different faiths that have never heard the gospel? Are they going to hell? Because as I read it, that kind of looks like the deal, and that's not a great deal. And he gave me kind of a, we don't know the mind of God, and maybe there's, some decision after death or something. It was a deeply unsatisfying answer to me. And that sort of started, I would say, the pebble in my shoe that led to deconstruction in my college years. Just something wasn't quite sitting right with me and the faith that I was being handed from, the Christian culture around me. And so I went a couple years to Anderson University, small Christian school that's connected to the Church of God. And it was after a trip through the college to Nepal. It was kind of an experience trip. You work alongside Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. It was after that trip that I dropped out of college because I was like, I don't know what to do with this, but it seems like if you're serious about Jesus, you wouldn't be spending a bunch of money at college. You'd be, living with the poor and doing it. And so I dropped out and took a break, and I like to joke that I'm still on the break. Yeah. Yeah. And then go ahead.
I'm curious, just because you said Nepal, did you see at Mountain Film the documentary between, what was it called, Mountain and Sky? Did you see that one?
I did not. We weren't able to get a spot for that, but I read about it and it looked amazing. Yeah.
I cried almost the whole dang thing. It was, this gal that
adopts 50 kids from Nepal, and incredible.
Yeah.
And there was another film, I forget if it was Mountain Queen.
I didn't see
the title of it.
Yeah.
But it's about a Sherpa woman who has climbed Everest like 10 times. And she was there at the festival. We got to see her. And
was that the gal that from Bangladesh?
No. So she's a little small, older woman.
Oh, she's from Nepal.
Yeah, from Nepal.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Who has been a guide on dozens of expeditions and some of it like 10 times or something.
Oh, I see. I missed that one. I need to see that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I've been rock climbing since I was 14. I never did huge summits like that, but I've done a lot of mountaineering. So anyway,
nice.
Cool. Yeah. So move on then. I'm sorry, but you went from that experience in Nepal with Mother Teresa.
She wasn't there. I think is one of the centers she set up, though, her Missionaries of Charity.
So if you're real followers of Jesus, you do something like that.
Right. And
you drop out of college and figure out what to do with your life.
Yeah. And I just kind of started wandering spiritually. I think I still was very into the Jesus story, but disillusioned with the American church, which seemed more focused on personal rights and freedoms and kind of the personal relationship with Jesus, which is cool. But I didn't see a lot of like, hey, we should actually do something with our faith and live out the words of Jesus rather than just have, this relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward a little bit, I became the worship leader at the church I grew up in, and became a pastor of worship and young adult ministry, and did that for about 10 years. And throughout that tenure kept running against the wall of, how far you can push things in the progressive direction. I was, becoming more, for lack of a better term, progressive in my faith and more concerned with issues of justice. And the 100-year-old German church, surprise, surprise, wasn't super into that. Great people, beautiful community. But I discovered that people have different ideas of what church is about and what it should do in the world. And so eventually left that church to start a church plant in South Bend, Indiana. And it was actually a really healthy parting. That church that I grew up in and was on staff at supported me in the church plant for the first year. And it was a good sending. And my lead pastor at the time, kind of knew that it wasn't the best fit, but also wanted to see me, succeed and flourish. And so they really supported me in this church plant, which was neat.
That's cool. So you're planting now. At this time when you planted, were you already married, kids, all that kind of stuff? Yeah.
So my wife and I got married like the year after she graduated from Anderson. And so by the time we planted this church in 2016, we had 3 kids and moved to South Bend, which isn't too far from Michigan, but, new community and new place. And
Did you have any kind of core group, and how did you finance it?
Yeah. So the friend I started the church with, I was the worship pastor. He was the teaching pastor. We had met through mutual friends and hung out and would, lament about what church could be. And then he said, "Hey, I'm starting this new thing. You want to be a part of it?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So he had a core group of people in the community. That's where he was from, South Bend. And, had some pretty good financial backing to where we were able to start a church plant with 4 full-time staff members, which was kind of unheard of. So it's
definitely.
Yeah.
What was it connected to any movement or denomination or anything?
Nope, non-denominational.
Totally
the church he was coming from was kind of a mega church connected to the Methodist Church. So,
okay. Huh. So how did it go?
It went really great until it didn't. Yeah. Long story short, it started out really cool and quite progressive theologically, and even practically. We met in the round with a very low stage, trying to break down the barriers between congregation and the people on the platform, trying to make it very participatory and practice-based, and saw a lot of success with it as far as like strong community growing. And it was really, I just got together with a couple of my friends that I started it with, and spoiler alert, we all got fired from the church. And we were just talking about how beautiful it was in the early days. And then the election of 2020 rolls around and it's Trump against Biden. And I put out a song called Hymn for the 81% that was a critique of the 81% of white evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump. And I put out this song. I figured, a couple hundred people would listen to it is my track record when I release a song into the world. And, but this one, got some traction, and the lyric video on YouTube kind of went viral. and racked up like 750,000 views, and Yahoo News and Huffington Post picked it up, and then Fox News picked it up, but not in a good way.
Right.
And things kind of got crazy from there. And
what year was it? 2020.
2020, yeah. So
election,
it was
before the election.
Yep, before the election. So It was February of 2020 that the song kind of took off. And Shane Claiborne did an interview with me.
Oh, wow.
That interview was what all the other news sites plucked from, took quotes from and ran with it. And so it was really wild. The song really struck a chord with a lot of people who felt similarly, that were confused about why so many people that claimed to be Christian would vote for a man that looked nothing like Christ. And but also not everyone liked the song. And so just a few short weeks after I released it, I was fired from my job as worship pastor at the church I started.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Because you said that when you started it, you were fairly progressive.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I think what I've learned from that experience and from talking with so many other pastors and music leaders and staff that have been either fired or forced out of their churches is that a church is only as progressive as the richest person donating to it. And so if you if the biggest donor doesn't like you, you're going to have trouble.
Wow. Well, I do think, so I went to a rehab at the end of 2018 and, lost my megachurch pastor job over the next 120 days. So I in beginning of 2019, the church that I founded and grew and pastored for almost 30 years, I was no longer the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up Republican pro-life, but I was, I think back now, I was never really like a gun. I was never very political, to be honest with you. And I'd say during the Obama years in my mega church, I'd say my under 40 crowd voted for Obama in both elections probably, and my over 40 crowd probably voted Republican. So even in my staff and in my board, I think we canceled each other's votes out through most of my 30 years of pastoring church, So I didn't try to use the church to push people Democrat or Republican, and people based on my preaching, because I did have a social justice platform. We didn't work it through politics more. We worked it more through showing God's love in practical ways to our city and serving our city in all the places. And then, in the nation, the world, we worked with Palestinians for years. After 9/11, I was talking about loving Muslims instead of carpet bombing them, and all those kind of things.
Radical proposition.
Yeah, right. Well, if we're Jesus followers, then, how do we, anyway, but when, I'd say when the Iraq war hit, my republicanism, I didn't like the Iraq war. And then I wasn't a Sarah Palin fan, when McCain picked Palin for his running mate.
Mm-hmm.
I had a gal in my church who brought Sarah Palin to Kansas City and was a big Republican funder, and she was wanting to get on the platform with Sarah Palin and Rick Perry and all these people. And I refused, I was like, no, that's not. Even then I was like, no. then that was like, it was like when Trump came along, I was like, holy crap. Like from the get go, I was like, oh no, this is a joke, right? Like I'm talking about in the 2016 primaries and stuff. I voted for John Kasich in the 2016 primaries.
Oh, you know what's funny is after my song blew up and I was getting death threats and crazy stuff, John Kasich reached out to me. It was like, hey, sorry about what's happening, and but good on you for doing it. It's kind of cool that he reached out.
Oh, that's amazing.
He also struck me as a person of integrity, and maybe you have policy differences with, but still a good person,
right?
Could lead a country, but of course that's not what the Republican Party at the time wanted. So
and then it just took, and then even with me, I was just like, what has happened since then with the Republican Party is just stunning to me, like beyond stunning. And so anyway, but I didn't have to lead. I lost my job before the 2020 election, right? And so the pastors and friends of mine that I talked to that led through COVID and through the 2020 election, it was just a different animal. Church, pastoring a church during COVID and the 2020 election. My friends, it's like people were forcing their pastors to take a political stand like never before, right?
Yeah,
especially in the white evangelical church. I mean, so wow, man. I remember you telling me this, but just soaking in all of the dynamics of that. Yeah. Like you're getting death threats.
Yeah.
Like by email, by DMs on your social media, every angle, like that kind of stuff.
Every angle, yeah. Even a couple of very creepy letters showing up at our house. Don't know how people got our address. We had to get like police patrols in our neighborhood. There were arson threats against our church. We had to have security at our church. It was, pretty wild. And I wrote it off as just internet crazies that aren't actually going to do anything. But it's unsettling. And it was almost always, good Christian people doing the threatening and saying horrible things to me. And just mad that someone would criticize them in this way.
Wow. Militant Christians. Yeah. We had a guy in Kansas City, pastors a small Pentecostal church, on Father's Day this year, give a Father's Day present, like an award in church. And I think it was like an AR. It's a machine. I'm like, this is not a joke. Like, literally. You're like, it's like I just don't like. Do people actually read what Jesus says?
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm just like, I just don't get it. Like, I mean, I get it, but it's still stunning to me. Like, I still am stunned by how Jesus, pacifist, crucified, and how then followers of that person end up being the people who build the cross versus the people who suffer the cross.
Right.
Just blows my mind. Still blows my mind.
Yeah. Shocking, but not surprising.
So what did you do after you lost your job, Dan?
Yeah, it was a wild time because so I was fired in early March and
2021 kind of thing
of 2020, and just days later the NBA shut down because of COVID, and then everything else shut down because of COVID. And So it's a very weird time for everyone. But that's how I actually got connected with Vote Common Good, was through the song. Doug Padgett and the Vote Common Good crew were touring around the country at the time, and someone sent them the song. And Doug got a hold of my number through a mutual friend and was like, hey, do you want to come sing this song on tour with us? And so I'd done a couple dates with Vote Common Good. And then I was fired, and I was like, well, I got some free time on my hands if you need some more music. That's when everything shut down and went digital. And so I actually helped Vote Common Good launch their podcast and have stayed on staff with them ever since. And they've been a real lifeline, not just as a job, but community as well. So, because that's the really tough thing about being let go from a church, or having to walk away from a church, even if you're not on staff, is that's your community. That's the people that help you move when you're, changing houses. Those are the people that show up for you. And you quickly realize that when you don't see people every week, at least once, you're kind of out of sight, out of mind, and no ill will, but those relationships just grow apart, even if there's no intention behind it. And so Vote Common Good was really a lifeline for me as far as community goes. So.
Yeah. So give us a little, I interviewed Doug last year, and, on Vote Common Good and the work that he did there, that he's doing. But give us, just, not everybody's going to have listened to that. Give us a little history of Vote Common Good and what you've been doing the last 4 years. Kind of give us a rundown on that. How did Vote Common Good start?
So Vote Common Good started in 2018. This was before my time, but it started in response to the Trump election. In 2016, Trump was elected, and Doug and other pastors and leaders started having conversations really around like whatever we thought we were doing as progressive-ish churches when it comes to politics, it clearly hasn't worked. That 81% of white evangelicals could vote this way means we have to do something different. And so they started Vote Common Good as a way to call primarily evangelical voters, but also Catholics, and we say people of good conscience, people who don't have a religious affiliation, to use the common good as their voting criteria instead of political binaries. And so we really try hard to offer an off-ramp to people who maybe grew up in the church and, voting Republican was synonymous with being a Christian. They've just never thought that those two things could be different. And so we're trying to show people, no, you can actually be a Christian and vote for someone who's not a Republican. That doesn't mean you have to align with every single policy issue or whatever. But Republicanism doesn't have to be your identity. And you can vote for whoever you think will do the most good for the most people. And so that's in broad strokes the work we've been doing. I joined in 2020, and over the last 4 years, we tour around in a big orange bus and hold rallies for candidates and also trainings for churches. So we've been really focused, especially since the January 6th insurrection, on confronting Christian nationalism. And so we have a whole curriculum and presentation about what is Christian nationalism, why is it bad for Christianity and democracy, and what can we do about it. And so over the last 4 years, we've been really focused on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So give us, what is Christian nationalism, Dan? This comes out on the 4th of July this week.
Yeah.
This is July 2nd, right now we're recording this, 2024.
Yeah.
And, yeah. What is Christian nationalism? Why should Christians, of all people, be concerned about Christian nationalism?
Yeah. I think Christians should be very concerned with Christian nationalism. And it comes down to Christian nationalism is kind of the unholy marriage of Christianity with nationalism. And when we say nationalism, we don't mean patriotism. Patriotism is when you love your country and you love freedom and you want what's best for everyone in the country. Nationalism trumps all of that. It trumps your religious identity. It trumps your religious values. But Christian nationalism co-opts the language and icons of Christianity in service to nationalism. And so it's not about let's make sure there's biblical values in government, because biblical values that are good for everyone should be, written into law. If atheists are also benefited by, the values that Christians share, yeah, let's have that be a law. But when the government chooses one particular religious group over others, that's when it becomes a problem. And it can sound innocuous or even sound good for a Christian to say like, oh yeah, we should be a Christian nation. We should put God first, even in our government. But the question comes down to which version of Christianity gets the say, which version of Christianity is at the top and gets to make the rules, and which versions of Christianity get left out and are punished because of it. And I think one of the telling things about Christian nationalism is who it benefits and who gets left out and what gets left out. Because the Christian nationalists that I hear the loudest are trying to get the 10 Commandments into schools and into courtrooms. They're trying to make it harder for LGBTQ people to exist in the world. But what I don't see them doing is anything about Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. I don't see them trying to use the power and resources of the government to help the poor. In fact, the opposite. They often want the local church to take care of the poor, but they want the federal government to punish the sinners. And I think that's telling about Christian nationalism, that it's really not about Jesus. It's about power.
I interviewed David Gushy.
Yeah.
Just a couple of months, 2 or 3 months ago, I can't remember when, on his book, Defending Democracy Against Its Christian Enemies.
Yeah.
such a powerful title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we drilled down on a lot of this. But, what's interesting, Dan, is, and I got saved in a Southern Baptist church as a teenager who was smoking weed and thought the whole world would be better if everybody would get high and chill out a little bit, and came to Christ and was, felt called to be a pastor and, was discipled by, my youth pastor and other people that I love, and they love me, and so grateful for that. But, when I was at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary working on my Master of Divinity, this was right at the cusp of the conservative takeover in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so people don't realize that, like, when I went to Baylor, I studied with very liberal professors at Baylor in my religion department in 79, 80, 81, 82. And then when I went to Southwestern in 83, all my professors would have been what we call moderate. weren't classically liberal, but they were not fundamentalists. They were not really even conservative. They loved Jesus, loved the Bible, but they were not, like inerrantists and fundamentalists and all kind of things. And so anyway, I studied with one of the world's renowned scholars in Anabaptist history and Anabaptist theology, William Estep. He wrote the Anabaptist Story. He translated the Schleitheim Confessions. I took every class he taught in history, and he wanted me to do PhD studies with him. And I ended up feeling called into the pastoral world instead of the academic world. But I've always had an academic part of me, and I ended up getting a doctorate and was working on a second doctorate when I went off to rehab. And so, at any rate, when I studied Anabaptist history, people don't understand, most Christians in America just don't understand the importance of the separation of church and state, in my view, based on the history of the Reformation. When I tell people, look, if in the Middle Ages, if you were in a Catholic nation and you didn't believe the doctrines of the Catholic Church, you could be, that was considered an act of treason punishable by death. People don't even, when I tell them that, they don't even realize that, right? Yeah. And then when the Reformation broke, all of a sudden you had Christians killing Christians. You had Lutherans killing Calvinists, or, I mean, the whole Christian world broke apart, and then everybody tried to do the union of church and state like the Catholic Church had done since Constantine. And so they killed each other based on doctrinal differences, right? The Anabaptists got killed by everybody. And in my estimation, they're the only ones that took the teachings of Jesus seriously in the Sermon on the Mount. They were pacifists. They literally took it seriously about loving your enemies. They really questioned the power of the state and how corrupt that is. And, they were more separatists than I would be, right? But I really grew to love and value how seriously the whole Anabaptist movement took. So that's what I learned in a Southern Baptist seminary in the 80s. And then now look at what's gone down. Like, I would guess that 81% of the white evangelical churches behind Trump, I'm guessing a bunch of those are Southern Baptists.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So think about my education in the 80s as a Southern Baptist, an ordained Southern Baptist pastor versus what's happening now. Think about that shift, right?
Yeah.
And then most Christians out there, or most people in the white evangelical world, have not, like, I've talked to them, I know them. They don't have a lot of history about why this First Amendment, why separation of church and state's important. Why would Christian nationalism be a problem?
Yeah.
I like to say the church has always been at its best when it was a persecuted minority. If you look through all the way through over 2,000 years of church history, when the church was in power, it's been as bigoted and discriminatory and oppressive as just about any other regime on the planet. And
what's wild is currently Christianity is in power. Like, almost every person in Congress or the Senate is a self-described Christian, percentage-wise at least. And yet Christianity also wants to claim the persecuted minority mindset. Like, if you go to a church or a political rally, Christianity is under attack. Christianity, Christians are being persecuted in America, which is not the case. Like, if you want to see real persecution, go to, a different country where Christians cannot worship freely. And it makes a mockery of what persecution really is. But that's what Trump ran on, was this is a quote that we reference quite often. He says, if I'm elected, Christians will have power, and lots of it. And Christians rallied behind that. They said, we're tired of feeling like we don't have a voice. We want to have power politically. Growing up, I remember reading books like, that spawned the movement of WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? And, all these books about how to live out your faith, even if it means sacrificing something or being inconvenienced or whatever. And then to see so many people and, spiritual leaders, people on TV and, Dr. James Dobson, Focus on the Family, all of them just be like, yeah, we weren't really serious about that. We want political power, and that's how we're going to get our Christian values into this nation. Just seems like a completely opposite attack than when I was growing up.
Yeah. I remember, I'm trying to, my brain forgets more than I remember, but a book came out several years ago, and it was a guy that was aligned with the moral majority and, trying to get Christians in power and all that whole movement politically, but then bailed on it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was pretty tight. And I can't remember the name of the book. It had the word power in it. It might've been Cal Thomas, or that might be totally wrong.
Rob Schenck. Does that ring a bell?
That's not the one I'm thinking of. But along the way, I started noticing that there were people who started seeing the problems with this, right? Like how far away from the persons and teachings of Jesus, the church can get, especially when it's killing in the name of Jesus, persecuting in the name of Jesus. It's just been bizarre to me how much, how it's like Christians justify acting in the opposite of Jesus and call it Christian. And it still boggles my mind,
And a lot of it seems to be fear-based.
So it was Cal Thomas. It's called Blinded by Might.
Oh, interesting.
Book called Blinded by Might. And he was an insider, very influential. And he was one of the first guys that I saw that that book probably came out in the 90s, I bet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but it was a critique of Christians in power and how corrupt that can become, So interesting stuff. So how do you find people when you do these Christian nationalism workshops? What are some of the most common questions that say come from average white evangelicals around this? If a light bulb starts clicking off in their brains, what are the things that seem to help them read? What have you found that helps white evangelicals, Christians rethink this? What are some of the things that you've seen that are like tipping points for changing people's minds?
Yeah,
it can be hard because we're so tribal, right? We hunker down in our tribes when stuff goes down.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of Christians, and a church that's willing to have us put on a presentation about Christian nationalism and why it's bad. The audience is already going to be leaning toward, I think it's a bad thing. And so we get a lot of people that are like, I've heard something about Christian nationalism, pretty sure it's bad. I couldn't describe what it really is. And so there are people that are curious and open to that conversation. And I think what surprises a lot of people, we play tons of videos from elected officials. And I think what's shocking is how open and blatant these people are about what they want to do with their political power and how they're using it. And I think one of the more shocking bits of video we have is from Attorney General Jeff Sessions who is describing the reason for the child separation policy under the Trump administration. So these are the images of kids in cages. They're taking, kids from their parents or guardians and separating them. And he goes, on the official White House lectern and defends this decision and says it's intentional and it's a deterrent, because I would like to direct your attention to the Apostle Paul, who says God has put, authorities over man, and you need to respect those authorities. And anything that the government does is good and just and right. And to disobey that, you have to face the consequences. And so this is a Christian man who's in a position of government power saying the reason we put this policy is because we've read the Apostle Paul this way. And that's what we mean by Christian nationalism. It's not that a politician can't be Christian. It's that you put into practice and into law and into policy things because of your Christian faith, even if it disagrees with morality that isn't bound by the Christian faith. So I think people are pretty shocked by what politicians say they will do with their power.
Man, it's bizarre to me.
Yeah,
it's bizarre. So you've got a few months left here. What's your focus in Vote Common Good these next several months between now and the election?
Yeah, so we're going to be on the road a lot from now until Election Day. There's 20 weeks right now until Election Day, which when you put it in a matter of weeks, it's like, oh, that's not that many weeks until we decide who's going to be president. And so we're really focused on reaching Christian voters and Catholic voters and people of good conscience who are concerned about where this country could go if there's another 4 years of Trump. And so that means we're going to be in churches and in public parks, putting on public rallies and talking to voters about voting for the common good instead of political ideologies that are bad for a lot of people. And what we like to remind people is, maybe some of Trump's policies worked for you. Maybe you got a better tax break, or maybe, some policy worked for you personally. But we're asking you to think about the common good, which is a bigger circle than just you, and listen to your neighbors who weren't just inconvenienced by the Trump years, but who felt their very lives were endangered by Trump's policies and rhetoric. And so that's really what we're getting at, is think about more than just yourself. And that's such a Christian message. That's like the heart of Jesus's messages. You maybe think about others.
Yeah. If you just take like the immigration issue alone, and granted, we need to handle that whole situation better than either Democrats or Republicans have done, right? Mm-hmm. But one of the things I've beat a drum for decades now is, like the Torah talks about, there's this Hebrew word ger, which gets translated the stranger or the foreigner, which Jesus picked up in Matthew 25 when he was talking about the sheep and the goats. And you did it to these, you did it to me. And one of the things in there is the stranger, which that goes back to the Torah law around immigrants and refugees, is what that's talking about. Yeah. And the Torah even says, hey, by the way, you should always be mindful and care for the ger,
Mm-hmm.
the stranger, the foreigner, the immigrant, the refugee. Why? Because
you were once a foreigner in Egypt.
You were once one of those coming out of Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And I've pounded this for years. I had a young woman who's now your age grow up in my church, and she came to Christ like as a teenager, and she now runs one of the immigration law firms here in Kansas City.
Mm.
And she out of when she was working on her law degree, she served a couple of years with Justice International, Justice Ministries International. It's like where lawyers go out as missionaries and serve.
Oh yeah, International Justice Mission.
Yeah, that's it. IJM. Yeah, and so she got just this and then she actually married an immigrant she met in college, from South America, and I had her speak in my church, and we're still good friends today. But just that issue alone, there's just almost like zero not understanding of that from a biblical perspective.
Yeah.
Of why we need to care for people who are in desperate situations,
mm-hmm.
who are fighting for their life and trying to survive and uprooted from land and culture and family and home. And these are people in desperate situations who are created in the image of God with dignity and worth. And so I've done at least one podcast with her just talking about this. And she comes from the kind of conservative backgrounds that we came from, conservative evangelical backgrounds. And so.
Yeah. And I think we've met so many of those families seeking asylum. In part of our work, we've been really focused on border and immigration reform. And so we've been down to the border a number of times. We actually cycled on bicycles the entire length of the U.S.-Mexico border. I did about 500 miles on a bicycle. We're going both sides.
I'm a cyclist. I keep telling Doug, again, invite me.
So we spent a lot of time at the border trying to tell the stories of people who are trying to come to America, because we've said the American dream is this is a place that anyone can come and be safe and make something of themselves and have a better life. This shining city on a hill. And we really believe that immigration is one place where typical Republican voters might differ from their Christian faith causes them to rethink their political identity, because they still think like, okay, maybe we should have a border wall. Maybe we should, have more border guards, but maybe we should care about the people that are trying to come here.
Right.
And we really feel that by sharing the stories of people, asylum seekers and refugees, that we can sway some voters as well to maybe we should have more humane policies. Yeah,
100%. So the gal that I'm talking about, who runs the immigration law firm here in Kansas City. So you remember this series that came out that Selena Gomez produced and sponsored called Undocumented?
Oh yeah.
On Netflix. So she's one of the featured stories in that whole Netflix series. She was helping a guy. She had ICE told her to bring one of her clients to their headquarters, and they weren't going to take him, and it was all set up. And they took him, and Andrea, I probably shouldn't. Anyway, my friend was there with him, and they actually accosted her and took him.
Oh my gosh.
And it was a lie. Right. And this is in this undocumented thing. So anyway, crazy. I mean, like when you dive into that, it's just like, holy crud, man.
Yeah.
And the way, and it was one of these classic stories of basically separating families from each other.
Yeah. And that the party of, quote, family values would also be the party of, we're going to be so tough on crime or whatever that we're going to separate families.
Yeah.
Is just wild to me that doesn't hurt people's brains when
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's just a weird thing. Tribes tribalism is such a powerful force.
Mm-hmm.
And once there's a majority opinion within a tribe, very hard to push against it, right? For people in general, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hey, we're about out of time, but man, thanks for coming on. And so I would you be willing to play your song that you had, 750,000 views on, and then I know it's been played out all over the place because I went through YouTube and just watched how many times it's been posted now in the last 4 years. And I'd love to.
Work.
Let's do it.
I've actually written a new verse for it since the song originally came out. It's kind of after January 6th and after, another election cycle and just realizing how deep the problem goes. I felt like I needed to add a little more to it. So you'll get to hear a new verse as well. So
awesome. Hymn for the 81%.
That's right.
Hymn for the 81%. If you just Google that, you can see you've performed this a lot. And
so have other people, which has been neat to see. Like other churches and artists have covered it, which is a real honor to see. So
that's awesome.
Grab my guitar.
I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service, and knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. And I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. So your fear, it turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. Yeah, you weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth, that's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome, injustice rule down. May love overcome, injustice rule down. May love overcome, injustice roll down. May love overcome, and justice roll down.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that song. Man, folks, share this. If you like what you've heard, now some of you might be going, I can't believe Fred's gone so far away from white evangelicalism. But for those of you who like what you've heard, like the song, be sure and share it. All right. And get it out there. Thank you, Dan, so much for joining us today. Appreciate the work you're doing. And it's been fun to hang out with you a couple times now.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Fred.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.